Well, we're involved with the environmental farm scheme, and part of that is we have set lower stocking rates around the lough area. We have fencing up to protect different wildlife species and woodlands from the stock. And even as where we're standing at the moment is an area of lowland wet grassland, and it's fenced off as well, so it only can be grazed at certain times of the year, and once again certain stocking levels. We don't put any chemical fertilisers on the land around the shoreline, and we only use our farmyard manure. I think it's easy to kick the farmers to say they're putting slurry out or they're putting pesticides out. I mean, farming has been going on this way for generations. Slurry is not a new thing. Pesticides are not a new thing. I don't know any farmers who don't value their land and don't value living in the countryside. Less pesticides and indeed less slurry is being used by farmers, and there are new procedures in place to maintain that and reduce that over the years. So I don't think it's fair to blame the farmers. I think it's very important to keep encouraging, especially our young farmers, which to be fair, DAERA are doing at the moment. They're encouraging young farmers to come in to succeed their parents or grandparents on the farms and to maintain that livelihood. So I encourage anybody in any industry, not just agriculture, to be careful for the environment and what they put into the water scheme.
Every farmer is an environmentalist. I like to introduce myself as a farmer and environmentalist. I don't see, it doesn't matter which one you put first. I think every farmer is also an environmentalist. We have lots of challenges in our industry at the minute, and our industry is continually challenged. Every generation of farmers faces challenge, and we see those in different ways. And every generation of farmer responds to those challenges currently. As farmers in this particular part of the world, in Northern Ireland where we're farming, we are perhaps better placed than many to meet the challenges that are ahead in terms of some of the other challenges. We take the politics out of it and look at some of the climate change challenges that we're going to face over the next decade. There are large parts of Europe where they will struggle to farm because of heat stress, because of drought, because of flooding. Northern Ireland, we're going to be to a large extent insulated from the worst effects of that. So we will continue to be able to farm. So that creates a great opportunity for our farmers here. And what's important for us as an organisation, the Ulster Farmers Union, it's important that we put in place and keep in place policies which allow our farmers to farm and to utilise the natural advantages that we have here, the resources that we have here, our ability to produce grass, to turn that grass into a much needed protein to feed the UK, Europe and beyond. So yeah, I think there's a real positive future for our farming industry in Northern Ireland. We have to ensure that we keep the pressure on government to put the right policies in place. There's a challenge over the next number of years as global population continues to rise. It then starts to flatten out. So if we can keep the right policies in place now, then that will ensure that longevity. And I am very positive about the future of farming and the future of society and the future generally. As far as I'd be concerned, we are seeing a characteristically longer, wetter periods and then warmer, drier periods. So these extremes that we're experiencing and have experienced the last number of years, I think are going to become more normal. So it's important that we have farming systems which can cope with those. So for some, that may mean to cope with the long periods of rain. It will mean to have systems which can manage that, so the land can manage that high level of rainfall. When we get to a drought situation, it's having systems which can perhaps capture some of that excess rain at other times of the year and have that available at times when we need that moisture and it's not coming naturally. So those are the sorts of things we need to do as an industry in order to work our way through and to build that resilience into our industry, to accept that weather pattern, climate change, it is part of what we have to farm through. For some people, it's an inconvenience. For us as farmers, it's everything we do. We cannot farm without nature. We have to farm with nature and with the climate, and that's something we have done for generations and we will continue to do for generations.
Crumlin River rises in the Belfast Hills, just about 4 miles from where we are now, flows through our farm and goes into Lough Neagh through Crumlin village. And I think it's important to realise that there are lots of tributaries that flow into Lough Neagh, and those tributaries carry water and carry effluents and pollutants and all sorts of silt and so on from the land in the area. The whole catchment of Lough Neagh is enormous. It's somewhere in the region of 1.3 million acres of land, and there's probably around 13,000 farmers like us, in the catchment. So what we do in our businesses is very important to the water quality and to the water in Lough Neagh. And sometimes I think it's hard for people to realise that you can be a long way away from the lough and from Lough Neagh and the algal blooms and so on that are there. You can be a long way from that, but you're part of the system and you're part of the flow of the water. The fields around us here on our farm, it rains, as it does a lot. It rains on the land. It drains off through the little streams and ditches, go into a main river. That river flows then down into the lake and takes with it any nutrients or any excesses that there are on the farm. And then once it's in Lough Neagh, the other thing we've got to think about is it flows out of Lough Neagh, right up the river bann and up to the north coast. And so sometimes what we do here can affect what happens on the coast, right up on the north coast of Northern Ireland. So it's important that as farmers, we look after our land as best we can and make sure that we do our little bit to reduce the amount of runoff and fertiliser and enrichment that might go into our water courses. Fish come up this river. We have trout and eels that come up the river from Lough Neagh. Really important as part of the ecosystem. And what we do here can affect the fish populations as well. So we've got to think about that on our rivers. As I said, there are around 13,000 farms within the catchment of Lough Neagh. If all of us can do a little bit on our farms to reduce, say even by 5 or 10%, the amount of nutrients and waste that go in or excess that goes in to the lough, then we can make really big changes. And so over the last 8 or 9 years, an environmental farming scheme has been running. We on our farm here have taken part in that. We've planted hedgerows, we've put up bird boxes, we've encouraged pollinators by planting trees that flower and help with wildlife on the land. And we can all do our little bit. But the most important thing that we've done, I think, is we've fenced off buffers around the river to keep our cattle out of the water. Cattle, unfortunately, if they go into the river, sometimes use it as a toilet, so you can get runoff there that isn't good. But also the land itself can have effluents that run off. So this little buffer strip, and I'm standing in one here at the edge of the Crumlin River, is about 2 metres wide, 2 metres back from the river. And that strip absorbs a lot of the nutrients that might run off the land before it gets into the water. We've also planted trees in this, and by planting the trees, we're able to absorb carbon, and this is part of a system where we can help capture carbon in the trees, but they're also excellent for wildlife along a river. They provide shade, they provide sites for birds to nest. The bats that fly up and down the water courses are using them as connectivity routes, and also the otters that run along the riverbank here that are feeding on the fish I mentioned and living in the water. They're a sign of good quality water, and Crumlin River has a lot of otters that run up and down along it. So we've got good habitat and good wildlife along here. Throughout the catchment of Lough Neagh, enough buffer strip fencing has gone in, incredibly. The same length that would stretch from Malin Head to Mizzen Head and right across Ireland. So a fence, the size and the length and the breadth of the island of Ireland has been put along little streams and little rivers within the catchment of Lough Neagh. 1,800 farmers have got involved in that scheme right across the Lough Neagh catchment. Within Lough Neagh itself and the Lough Neagh scheme and the close to the lough shore, around 35% of the shoreline fields are within the scheme. And here farmers are looking at the high nature value of the grasslands and the habitats that are there, and are farming those in a way that's positive for nature. So farming with water is very important for all of us as farmers, and a very important aspect of keeping water quality up. And of course, what we also got to remember is that this river flowing beside us here, the source of this water is coming off the land, and 45% of the population of Northern Ireland are actually drinking this water coming from this source. So we have a responsibility as farmers to make sure that we keep the water as clean as possible. Other things that I think are becoming issues is that Plastics can wash in, so we've got to be very careful on the farm. We use a lot of plastics. We use a lot of vet med containers and veterinary medicine items. And we've got to make sure that those containers and plastics from our silage wrap doesn't end up in the water, break down into microplastics, and then there be the issues that arise from that in water systems. So we have a lot of responsibility on our land, but farmers, sometimes people say that the farming and having farms is part of a problem and part of an issue. But we think that we can be part of the solution, that actually we can help by removing a lot of the items from our farms, stop them getting into the waterways, and make sure the nutrients are actually used where we want them and need them, which is on our land and on the farm and not getting into the waterways. And schemes like the Lough Neagh Partnership Environmental Farming Scheme are very useful for that.